Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Sheldon with the Metropolitan Library System. It's June, and if you remember last June's podcast, we had City Councilman James Cooper on to talk about the history of the LGBT community in Oklahoma City. Councilman Cooper talked about many things, but one story he mentioned was the story of Paul Thompson. Here's a clip from that interview where he talks about Mr. Thompson's story.
The same year of the Stonewall riots, there was this guy, Paul Thompson. He went into a beer bar. He goes, he kisses 3 of his friends on the neck to say hello. They're friends. Those friends walk out. They are all promptly arrested by the police. They're in jail. Well, what would normally have happened is people would just plead guilty to it, right, for what was called, quote, lewd and lascivious behavior, which sounds like something someone from Rocky Horror Picture Show would say, like in a very lewd and lascivious, But they were arrested, and normally what would happen is the Oklahoma would have published your place of employment, the address, your home address, under that title, lewd and lascivious. So no one was coming out of the closet. You're not coming out of the closet. You come out of the closet, that's your job. You're getting fired. And that's kind of if you're lucky, because now your home address has also been published. What kind of fear and harassment are you now opening yourself up to, right, if someone has that sort of fear and paranoia and ignorance in their heart? So, Paul Thompson did something that no one had ever done before, and he sued. He actually said, no, you don't. I'm fighting this. I'm going back. And he stood up, and the judge found that language, lewd and lascivious, was too subjective and thusly unconstitutional. And he won. And he won the same year as the Stonewall riots happened in New York City, where LGBT people, as you know, stood up, fought back against, similar to the Engel story, but they had been living through it for years in New York, year after year after year of intimidation and brutality and physical assaults by the police. And while Stonewall rose up, so too did Paul Thompson here on an individual level.
Since the release of that podcast, we did some digging in our archives, and we're lucky to find that we had an interview with Paul Thompson that was conducted back in 2007. So we thought it might be fun to listen to the story as told by Mr. Thompson himself.
You were also were a gay bar owner at one time?
Very short time, but that was way into my later career. Okay. I was a gay person. Realized I was gay, was in some different relationships, how the gay bar thing happened. It was also the beginning of my civil rights career, you could say, because up until that time, like many gay people, I really did think that gay people who got in trouble were just stupid, because I knew how to keep out of trouble. I knew how to never be in trouble, and it couldn't possibly happen to me. And we had a person, my lover and I at the time had a person we considered a friend. Probably wasn't such a good choice of friends, but anyway.
Well, we live and learn.
Yes, it's true. And we went into this bar, which we went into periodically. We were out together for an evening of going to the bars. And this tended to be a quiet bar. It was a beer bar. It was called The Cleaners. And it was on Northwest, on the northeast corner of Northwest 12th and Pennsylvania. And went in, and I have, in some ways, more flair now than I've ever had. In some ways, not the most I've ever had, but at the time I had a certain amount of flair. And I walked into the bar, and there were 3 men that I knew sitting on bar stools, and I walked up and kissed them each on the back of the neck. And there was this person that I didn't know in the bar, so obviously he was not recipient of my largesse. And
he was kissophobic then.
Yeah, well, I just didn't know him, so, I did know the other guys, and I knew they wouldn't be freaked out by it. And so we had a beer, and it was very quiet in there and not terribly entertaining. So as we walked out, I kissed each one of them on the back of the neck, got out in the parking lot, and it lit up like the proverbial gangbusters with police cars and lights, and the guy that I didn't kiss was a police officer. And in those days...
The man you did not kiss.
The man I did not kiss.
Oh, well, sounds like jealousy or sour grapes to me.
And at that time, it was quite common, at least before elections, but periodically anyway, for the police to go into gay bars and clubs and arrest people for various immoral outrages like two men dancing together or whatever. They used to do a lot more laying traps for people in parks, et cetera, than they do now. And things that if straight people did them in a bar or a club, everybody go, oh ho hum, But I was arrested for lewd and lascivious public behavior. That's the exact quote.
What year was this?
I'm terrible at years. I can't tell you the year. I'd have to think back.
Mid-50s? Would have been
probably the mid-50s or maybe the 60s.
Okay. Would it have been during the time of D.A. Curtis Harris?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And although I don't think he necessarily wound him up to do that, it was just something the police like to do in their spare time.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, they still do occasionally.
Yes. But what used to happen at the time is that gay people would get arrested. They would go down and pay a fine and technically plead guilty. If you pay a fine, then it's a guilty plea and it would go on your record.
Right.
And and then they would just freak out and stay home a lot, go into the closet for practically ever. And so when they arrested me and took me to jail, and I spent the night in jail, I was furious. Because as far as I was concerned, they picked on the wrong damn queer. And
this would have been the old antiquated jail.
Yes.
Across the street from
not the new shiny
current
jail.
Right.
The
has
old
the escape
antiquated,
problems.
yes, the real terrible jail. And so I did what any self-respecting human being would do, but most gay people never did do, which was the three guys that were arrested and I don't know if they took them to jail or not, because I guess they were semi-innocent victims, although they were sort of considered to be consorting. And we got a lawyer and went to court, scared to death, because we didn't know what would happen, because, if you go to court and you fight it, they can do worse things to you. And fortunately, we had the judge we had, who looked like an old curmudgeon. I say that as an old curmudgeon now, but he had his reading glasses down on the end of his nose, and the police officer said, what he had arrested me and us for, and the judge said, "Is that all that happened?" And he said, "Well, but there was other things going on in the back room." He said, "And did you file any charges?" He said, "Well, no," and he blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to stop a minute and explain something that's important in here. A lot of people don't know this, but to be constitutional, a law has to be stated in a way that if you read it, you could tell what you were supposed to do or not supposed to do.
It has to be very specific.
It has to be clear about the intent of the law, what is and is not prohibited. And if there was a law in Oklahoma City that you couldn't wear a red plaid shirt from 2 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon on any Thursday, and you didn't know about it and you wore one, you could be arrested and you would be found guilty, because you don't have to know the law to be guilty. But if you had looked at the law and couldn't figure out what they meant for you to do or not do, it is not constitutional. The law was, no one shall behave in a way in public as to be lewd and lascivious. That's entirely up to somebody's interpretation.
Right.
There's no way for you to know exactly what they're going to think is lewd and lascivious on any certain day. So we didn't really go up with the idea of a constitutional test, but in fact, the judge said that and so I have no choice but to dismiss this case. It's the first time it ever happened for a gay person in Oklahoma City, because nobody had ever fought it before. They just thought we were lower than pond scum and deserved all this abuse we could get. And so, and after that, my ex at the time, it was not my ex at the time, but we bought into the bar from the guy that had been the owner of it, sole owner of it at the time, and decided it needed remodeling and refurbishing and closed it. And I put a big note on the door that said, "Closed for remodeling, open soon under new management." And I said, parenthesis, "Sugar," I quote, "Sugar Smith, watch our dust." The arresting officer's name was Smith,
Okay.
I was the one that gave him the name Sugarsmith. He was called Sugar the whole rest of his life.
That's fabulous.
At that point, that was kind of the beginning of my career, you could say, or my path as a human rights activist, because when I got it, finally, that if it could happen to me, it could happen to anybody.
Mm-hmm. So you would say this was your first civil rights?
That was my first civil rights
activist
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there was a long history after that.
So, and it's been uphill ever since?
No, I mean, I've had some, I think that over a period of time, I've made some differences.
So do you think that your case defined what is lewd and lascivious, at least in Oklahoma County?
I think my case managed to find what the police and the city could get by with in a lot of ways. And I don't mean that they never did do that again, that they were never homophobic again, that they saw the light. But I do mean that I think that they realized that they had to, A, change the law to make it constitutional, and that it's kind of like the Stonewall riots. Mm-hmm. That was the first time in New York or any place in the United States anybody's really aware of that gay people fought back. Yes. They didn't just lay down and take it. And if you don't fight back, they think, oh, well, this is fun. Let's keep doing it, and let's do it even more.
Oklahoma City has come a long way since then, and Mr. Thompson's fight, as well as the hard work of the Oklahoma City LGBT community, lives on. If you'd like to hear either James Cooper or Paul Thompson's interviews in their entirety, please find us at metrolibrary.org and let us know. Special thanks to Jim Nimmo for his contribution to the interview with Paul Thompson. Thanks for listening.